right, welcome to podcast 10 of the Actual Astronomy podcast. This episode, we're going to talk about new telescope in a gear talk. And what we'll do is Shane's going to talk first about getting his new telescope, which is always really exciting. And then Chris, that's me, I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. So without further ado, hey, it was great seeing you yesterday.
What was that, about 7 seconds at your door?
7 seconds, not quite at my door. We were keeping like that 6 to 10 feet distance there, so very safe.
Yeah, very safe, abiding by all the rules.
Felt kind of weird.
Yeah, it was different.
Yeah, for sure. So this was a contact free pickup where Shane needed some stuff, but actually our pandemic restrictions are starting to get lifted here in about 8 or 10 hours or so, starting at midnight.
Yeah, we seem to be in a unique spot in the country where, I don't know, I think we're somewhat fortunate, and just good practices were put into place where I think the spread here is fairly well contained. So I guess time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell for sure. But yeah, I think according to what I've been seeing, it's just like one case every 2 or 3 days or something like that. So, after 2 or 3 weeks of this, they're going to try to open a few things back up. And hopefully everybody continues to abide by all these rules, including amateur astronomers like us who are trying to get their telescopes up and running.
That is right. Yes.
So, hey, and by the way, thanks so much for all your hard work on the podcast. This podcast was your idea, and you put a lot of work into getting all the feeds up and getting them synced. And we do these podcasts in sets. So we do one kind of where we talk about gear or equipment and like what we're doing in our own astronomy, what we're observing, and then out of that we kind of take a look at what we're focusing on in those more casual, unscripted discussions, and then we try to pull something out maybe that people could learn something from, and then do a podcast on that. So maybe if you don't understand something in this type of episode, then there's those ones for people to kind of build your knowledge. So, hey, by the way, I heard from Mike this week.
Oh, okay.
And he's been observing Venus. So Mike is one of our observing partners. I was going to say friends, but like when you're observing with people, it is like a different relationship for sure than just being friends. Because when you're going out into the places that we're going, your friends might leave you behind, but but you guys have treated my burns and scrapes, and somebody who's helping Mike change tires on his trailer last year at a remote site. So, but he was saying that he thinks Venus looks like a giant silver banana through his Takahashi FS78.
That's a fairly accurate description.
So, and building on that, Shane, has your observing been as fruitful?
Oh, well, yeah. So I received my new telescope, the Takahashi FC76 DCU.
And this is what kind of telescope again?
This is a refractor, a apochromatic doublet.
Yeah.
What else can I say?
It's color free, and it comes with dollar signs both inside and out.
Yes. Focal length, 570 millimeters. So it's not what we would consider a fast telescope of shorter focal lengths, but it's certainly not a slow telescope. Like, F10 would be slow and an F5 would be fast. So I'm kind of right in the middle of that.
Yeah. So with a 10 millimeter eyepiece, you would get 57 magnification, or 57x as it's often written.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so I have to thank you for lending me some gear last night to allow me to use this new telescope.
Don't worry, I have my favor coming.
Okay. So last night was first light with the telescope, and I was quite pleased with the performance, and really pleased is a bit of an understatement.
Oh yeah, so you gotta tell me. So we haven't. You sent me a photo of it set up after you did the pickup of the extender and the clamshell, because your telescope didn't come with rings to mount it for the to the mount. And then I also own the extender, which can take this telescope into a 570 millimeter focal length and turn it into about a 950. So you go from f7.5 to like around f12.5 or 12.6 or something. So did you run it Which focal length did you run in? Did you run it in the 7.5 or did you run it in the 12.5?
12 and a half. Yeah, I put the extender in and ran it like that the whole course of my session.
Wow, that is amazing. So how were the views?
Well, let me start off by saying the seeing wasn't great. So again, seeing is kind of the condition of the atmosphere that we're looking through. And when the atmosphere isn't stable, it does impact the view. Um, so with that being said, though, I was still really blown away. I started with Venus and progressed to the moon. Essentially, that was kind of it. I did do some star tests as well. You know, a star test is a good thing to do with any new telescope.
How did the so what you look for is you kind of look for these concentric rings in an out of focus star, and it's sort of ideal. You almost want it to look like a sliced onion is kind of what I think about.
Yeah, that's a great description. Yeah,
Yeah.
you want to see a bunch of rings that are all sort of symmetrical
Yeah,
and all aligned, decent, like a bullseye in a way, right?
yeah,
And
kind of. And I mean, really, what it comes down to is that like anything that looks really strange is typically not so good in most situations. So there's a few telescopes that do star test oddly.
yeah,
But how did the star test look in yours? Did you get some nice circular rings?
yeah, beautiful concentric circular rings. Yeah, no issues. It's the most perfect star test that I've seen through any telescope that I've attempted it with.
Yeah, my 60 is like same. Like it's so good. It's just like magic. Like
Hmm.
how good these little Takahashis are. These are the type of little telescopes that people say that they outperform larger telescopes. And I've had lots of little refractors before, and certainly these ones are in that class that really make you just astounded at what a little telescope can show. So what eyepieces were you using on this last night?
So I started off with my 24 millimeter Teleview Panoptic, which gives you the widest field of view in an inch and a quarter eyepiece. So just to see what the field of view was like in this telescope. And then it's a nice finder eyepiece. It makes it a lot easier to just locate a planet in the sky because you get about a 3-degree field of view with that eyepiece and telescope. But from there, I progressed onto orthoscopic eyepieces of an older vintage, the 0.965-inch size orthoscopics. And I've varied my focal lengths from 25 millimeter down to, well, actually 2.8 millimeter,
Oh wow.
and really kind of pushed the telescope and just, seeing what it could do at various magnifications.
So what magnification? And so you started with Venus, I think you said. So what magnification seemed to work best last evening?
Um, Best magnification was around 100. Like I had a 9 millimeter eyepiece, so let me just do the quick math on that. That would give me 107.6 times.
Yeah.
That was about the best, and even that was probably pushing it a little bit because, like I mentioned earlier, the seeing wasn't that great. And when the seeing isn't great, usually all magnification does is amplify the kind of the nastiness in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and I kind of find that there are an awful lot of nights, and I think I even wrote you an email about this recently, like when we were talking about powers and what I thought would be sort of a magical eyepiece for that telescope, depending on your setup, and really around that 120, somewhere between 100 and 120. Most nights that are going to be any good at all, you should be able to hit about 100 to 120, and last night I think was kind of like a mediocre seeing night. I didn't set up for a few reasons. Not the least of which is that you took half my equipment. No, I'm just
Well, yeah, you had nothing left.
kidding. Yeah. So, hey, what did you think of the clamshell? Because we had this long chat about whether you would get rings for your refractor, or whether you would get one of the Takahashi clamshells to attach it to the mount.
I loved it. I absolutely
Oh, you
loved it.
did? Okay, good.
Yeah, my biggest concern was vibration. I'm extremely sensitive to vibration when I'm looking through a telescope,
Yeah.
and when it drives me crazy is when I'm trying to focus an eyepiece. If it's vibrating like crazy as soon as you touch the focusing knob, it makes it really challenging to get a nice crisp focus.
Yeah.
And even when I put that 2.8 millimeter eyepiece in there, which gave me 346 times magnification, I was still able to focus it without vibrating. Well, there was a little bit of movement, but it was very easy to overcome. And I was really impressed, and I'll say a little shocked actually at how stable that clamshell kept the telescope.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I loved it.
it's solid. I mean, I'll give it that. It's heavy, like
Yeah. Yeah. It does
especially
weigh
on
a
my
little bit.
60.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, that worked out really well. So I spent a little bit of the uh, well, I was out at twilight, so it was still pretty bright out, and started with Venus. Then I went to the moon, and then I came back to Venus when it was darker, just to see how things looked with blacker sky behind it.
Mm,
Um, th- the image scale really stood out. You and I have been doing a lot of Venus observing lately with 60 millimeter telescopes. Now, going from a 60 millimeter to a 76 millimeter doesn't sound like a lot on paper, but it really does add an awful lot of surface area and overall diameter to your telescope, which increases how big things appear, like
yeah.
planets. So the image scale right away stood out. Like Venus looked considerably larger than what I've been used to the last month or so. Um, but the seeing really diminished a lot of my ability to pull in some detail. Although, we've talked a lot recently about the cloud observations that we've had. I was able to make out some darkness in between the limb and the terminator. So the limb is kind of the edge of the outer edge of the planet, and then the terminator is where the light turns into darkness.
Yeah.
Um, so I was able to make out a little bit of darkness in that V formation in the clouds,
Yep.
but it was fleeting. And it didn't pop out to me as much as it has on some other nights that we've had where the seeing was better.
Oh, well, keep in mind too, that as it becomes more and more of a crescent, those type of details are more difficult to discern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good
That,
point.
that
Yeah.
that is just a little bit of the nature. Now, some of it might have been the seeing, but certainly I noticed since the mid to end of March, in March, March 24th or whatever it was, I set my telescope out and I could just see clouds on the surface or on the tops of the cloud decks of Venus. But then by the end of April and the last time I went out, I could see a little, but it really wasn't very much. So after about a month, it really has become more and more difficult. So here in the next few days, like these are going to be the last chance to really have much of a view. Of course, you're getting that beautiful banana shaped silver crescent, as Mike put it. So
Yeah. I think, and this is really hard for me to say confidently because of how the seeing, again, wasn't that great. But in those darker areas, during the brief moments where the seeing would stabilize, just for like a millisecond, um, I felt like I was able to see a couple little bright dots in that dark area.
really,
Yeah. Now, again, like it only seemed to pop a couple of times, and because the seeing was questionable, maybe it was just a aberration of the atmosphere. Essentially, it's hard to say, but
yeah,
I was intrigued.
it's really weird though, and this is I believe in a way you're referring to is what's commonly spoken about as the ashen light of Venus, which is the illumination or partial illumination of the dark side. Of it.
Well, sorry, just to maybe clarify, it wasn't on the dark side. It was just on
Oh,
the darker part of the illuminated side, like kind of where
oh,
that V shape is.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
those bright spots. I mean, those are for sure. I've drawn those, and like I've drawn those recently, and other people in other parts of the world in North America and that they've drawn them at roughly the same time, and I've noticed they matched up perfectly. And there's unless it's some sort of common illusion, it seems like for sure. And then I saw there was some sort of really good image, whether it was from a mountaintop observatory or a spacecraft or something. I don't know. I'm not really keeping up with the space sciences these days, but I did see one, and it did match up with what I was seeing as well. So it seems like that if you are seeing those, then I'm pretty confident. I'd be more confident than not. Maybe is the way to put it. That's what you're seeing.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing that stood out for me when I was looking at Venus is the lack of false color in the telescope. So, using a refractor telescope, one of the complaints that people have, especially with faster telescopes or with achromatic telescopes, is that when you're looking at a very bright object, there will be false color that the telescope optics introduce, whether it's a yellowish tinge or sometimes it's purplish. Um, I didn't really notice any of that. There was just a little bit of color around Venus, but even that, I don't know if that was really color or just some flaring in the eyepiece. It was kind of, it was hard to say for sure, but I was really impressed with that aspect of it too.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a variety of different things that can introduce color. You will never get 100% color free, no matter what type of telescope or eyepiece or whatever you're using. Like if you're a decent observer, you're always going to detect some color because your eye is not perfectly apochromatic. Your eye is just really a singlet. So
Yeah, yeah.
your eye itself will introduce some spurious color. Um, and that will be very minimal, but you may detect it. I feel like I can actually detect color in even my eye, and especially wearing glasses. Like I'm a glasses
Mhm.
wearer, and I've never had a pair of glasses. I have a pair of Zeiss glasses that I will wear from time to time when I'm doing planetary observing, and for the most part those are color free, but like my regular everyday glasses, I can see secondary like color. And I guess maybe we should describe what is the secondary color, kind of what does it look like, Shane?
Well, for me, like when I see it, say on the moon or a bright object, it's a yellow tinge
Mm,
around kind of the usually the edge of it,
yeah.
or in brighter craters, that type of thing. You can see it sometimes.
Yeah, and like sort of true in what we think of as like an achromatic or not a fully color corrected optic, whether it's my glasses or a telescope, you'll often see like even like a red or a blue fringe. Like I
Mhm.
once got a pair of eyeglasses that were so bad for this that I had to take them back because everything I looked at, like my white railings and the house and everything, just had a fringe, like whether it was red or blue. On one side it was
Mhm.
red, and on one side it was blue, and just the correction on it was too poor. So I had to go up in, there's like this index, this Abbey index that they use, and they had to go and get me a better Abbey number. So
Wow.
yeah. Well, that's cool. That's cool that it's giving such nice images. And you said you just kept the extender in the whole night, eh?
Yeah, yeah. The whole night I kept it in, and then I moved on to the moon later in the night. So Venus was already, it's starting to get a little lower every night, I believe. And the lower things are in the sky, the more atmosphere you look through, and typically the worse seeing you encounter.
Yeah.
The moon was much higher, and I felt like the seeing was certainly better in that part of the sky.
Yep.
And wow, the moon is always incredible to me for how much detail it can show you. But I feel like last night was the most impressive lunar session I've ever had. And I don't know if it was just kind of, I'm in the honeymoon phase with a brand new telescope that I'm, wanting to see amazing detail. But the stuff that I saw just popped. Like I'm sure it's there in other telescopes, but it just was so crisp and was so easy to observe last night. I couldn't believe it. And then I mentioned earlier, like I went all the way from 25 millimeter focal length eyepiece down to 2.8 millimeter, and the image did not break down. At 2.8 millimeter, 346 times magnification, it was still a really nice image that was very observable and showed a whole lot of detail. Like at that magnification, it almost felt like I was flying over the surface of the moon, seeing the shadows from some of the mountains, seeing real gentle topographic changes, in elevation. Um, oh, I could go on. It was really an incredible view.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta admit though, I've had my little tack now for I think 3 or 4 years, and the images through that, they are just astounding. And like many times like I'm out with it, and again, just like you were experiencing last night, and it's why I've also, as I'm sure we'll get to, recently bought another one. Just been astounded. My wife and I are looking at the moon last week, or I guess very early this week, anyway, about 7 days ago. And boy, like I was looking, I said, hey, like you gotta check this out. It kind of looks like somebody's just like taken like clay and made like this beautiful, like fine scale. Like it was that sharp and detailed. It just looked like you could reach out and touch it. And she was like, oh, come on, like, let me have a look, like, whatever, like, this sounds like hyperbole to me. And she looked and she said, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it looks like. It looks like it's just right there. It's just hard to believe it's, way up in our sky. And, typically something you just kind of glance at and you're like, oh yeah, there's the moon or whatever. But, when we were looking at it through the little Takahashi, it just performs.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And the thing too, for folks that have never looked at the moon through a telescope or even binoculars, you don't even need high power to really see a lot of this stunning detail. Like when I was looking at it at 25 millimeter focal length, so that's about 38 times, I was like, again, the detail was just out of this, like, outstanding. And even like a 10 by 50 binocular, you'll start to see some crater detail, and it really turns into an image that you're used to in a photograph rather than just what you see naked eye in the sky.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so that was kind of my rocket sled tour through my observing session last night.
So did you get up and do did you have a look at any of the planets in the morning sky?
No, I didn't. In fact, my session last night wasn't all that long. The night before, I didn't really get much sleep. My dog was keeping me up, and
Oh,
and
no.
I was pretty tired last night.
Yeah.
And, you and I both, I think, have kind of a similar approach to this stuff. That if you're tired, just don't push it, because
Yeah.
that's when you drop eyepieces or make mistakes. So, you
Grab
know,
your grab your stove with your bare hand.
yeah. So I think I was out from about 8:30 till 10 last night,
Well,
and
that's a nice session.
yeah, it wasn't bad. I really wanted to stay up later and look at some clusters and double stars, but I just didn't have it in me. And then to wake up early, the forecast wasn't looking great last night either. Like, it was a little breezy, I think. So
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you were able to get some views there. Like, I kind of thought like I probably won't be going out last night anyway for whatever reason, but I thought it would be great if you could at least get a session in, and even if that meant that I wouldn't be able to use that particular Takahashi's telescope. So yeah, that's cool. So do you think you're gonna, and here's the thing with that extender is, I actually don't think it's worthwhile for us both to own one. So we should just use that one and then just spare it off, because
yeah, I guess that's an idea.
it is like, I think what you'll find after a while, like, you should try it with and without. And I think you're going to find, like we discussed the other day over text, that boy, you have to be using the right eyepieces for that really to work the way it's designed. But as soon as you introduce too much into your optical system, you might as well just not be using it. It's something where you need to be using just the right eyepieces at just the right powers, or else you're just making life more difficult for yourself by using it. I think anyway. So
Well, one thing I did notice is, like, when you do a star test, so again, you're racking the focuser out of focus and looking at the circles around the bright star. Is I took that telescope out at about 5 o'clock with the extender in, and then I started observing around 8:30. So the reason I did that was because you want your optics to be the same temperature as the outside air. If it's not, if your telescope is warmer, you're going to introduce bad seeing within your telescope. Essentially, the image won't be crisp. But when you do the star test, you're able to tell a little bit if that telescope is thermally acclimated to the outside air. And even at 8:30, it really wasn't fully acclimated because the temperatures were dropping and the telescope was having a hard time keeping up with that.
yeah, I think
And I think that's because of the extender,
I think it is.
adding that much glass.
Yeah, like I think it is too, because I was the last time I was out with it, like I said, I think it was last Sunday or maybe Monday. Anyway, I did go back and forth between the extender and not, which is kind of a pain, because this thing, I think the way to describe it is, it kind of sounds like a Barlow because it magnifies the image 1.7 times. But it's a little bit well, it's modular and you're integrating it. So a Barlow is a device that sits typically although not always, in your diagonal or in your eyepiece holder, and then you put your eyepiece into that, and it provides some sort of, typically most Barlows run at 2x magnification, but this thing actually threads in between, somewhere between the focuser itself and the objective lens. And I think it's got 2 or 4 pieces of glass in it. I can't remember, but
I think it's 2 because it turns the doublet into a quad.
Okay, that's right.
Arrangement. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so this actually not only magnifies, but it's designed to work. It was originally designed to work with the 60 millimeter optics that I have, but then it was almost like coincidental that it was also going to work with the 76. And from what I've read, it actually works better with the 76, in that it actually provides even additional like field flattening. So you get this perfectly flat field, whereas most refractors will have some field curvature. But yeah, but it's an expensive piece. I don't know what they're running now, but I think they were around 500 American dollars, something like that. But like for me, I only use it when I'm teaching my class or if I'm doing some planetary observing, like around the house. And then it's for the most part, I'm just running it in the f6 mode.
Right.
So
Yeah. My next test will be without it, just to see what the 76 does, kind of in its native focal length.
Yeah, and you should try those same eyepieces, and then try your whatever wide fields you might have, or like I know you have the Leica Zoom, and that's the one that I'd be most curious about, because, for example, with my Pentax eyepieces, one of them, in order to hit around 100 power, I've got a Barlow, and I've got a couple good Barlows, but when I Barlow it, just that additional bit of glass, when I'm running it in the f10 mode, gives me way more chromatic aberration than without the extender, and running without the Barlow, but using a higher power Pentax eyepiece. So I'm just like, what am I doing with this thing? I'm turning a really little portable telescope into, well, it's still pretty portable, but it's a little bit longer, and I'm just not really sure like what I'm actually doing at that point. So
Yeah.
I'm not really sure but I think there are some situations, where it's beneficial, but yeah, it's kind of a keyhole thing. So like I said, I don't know that it's worth us both owning that particular piece of equipment. So, but anyway.
Yeah. I need to spend some more time with the whole setup and get used to it. But I tell you, I loved it. And one thing we talked about on one of the earlier podcasts was whether or not I'd replace the focuser on the Takahashi.
Yeah.
Because it's a single speed focuser, and in some people's opinion, it's the weakest part of the telescope. And in fact, it drives some people crazy because, for what the telescope actually costs, you would think it would come with a high end dual speed focuser.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. So the diagonal that I was using is it's a Bader prism, and the eyepiece holder has a little helical focuser on it, meaning you basically rotate the eyepiece, and I think it has maybe a centimeter of travel. So not a lot, but if you kind of keep it in the middle, it really is it works exceptionally well as a fine focusing sort of addition to your telescope. So, between the diagonal and the stock focuser that was on there, again, I was able to get by even at the extreme magnifications that I pushed it to. So
yeah,
that was interesting. Can't really make a decision or judge the whole package on an hour and a half's observing, but a super promising start.
Yeah, I think actually I'm going to use one of mine. So maybe I should say this. I was going to buy the 76 millimeter that you bought. And you know that as well. And I know we talked about it quite a bit. So I think I sent you a bit of a surprise this week, eh?
Yes, I was not expecting that picture. Why don't you tell everybody what arrived at your doorstep?
Yeah, so I get the 100 millimeter or the 4-inch version of the Takahashi D series. So, but this is the DC. It's the smaller one with the 1.25-inch focuser. And we had talked about this. I can't remember if we talked about it in a podcast or whether we were just talking. And the downside of that telescope, if there is one, at least for me, is that it would really limit you to 1.25-inch eyepieces. and you can get a 2-inch adapter, but then I found out that the opening on that really isn't not probably not quite large enough to give you like that full light cone. So you might get some little bit of vignetting, or like it's kind of give you some distortion in the edge of the field. And when you're talking about these kind of telescopes, you don't want to be introducing like optical aberrations and errors. So, but then I found out that you can actually use any of your components from the 60 or the 76 with the 100 as well. And I kind of knew you sort of could, but it's a pretty big gamble and quite a bit of money if you can't find someone that hasn't ventured there before you. So I knew theoretically it should work, but then just as I had the 76 millimeter in my shopping cart, and had already sort of made some arrangements with the distributor, I just hadn't sort of pressed the buy button on it. I found out that 100% that focuser from my 60 millimeter that I had custom made would work in the 100. So I just went, you know what, I'm just going to go with the 100 right now. And then that way, like, we're also not duplicating our equipment. Like I really was keen to get the 76 because I have the extender. But if you were getting that anyway, like eventually once we get out of the lockdown situation, I'm sure I'll be able to get lots of views. So we'll have the 60, I have the 60 of the 76. And between those two, we have 4 different configurations. And then with this, kind of gives you that larger 100 millimeter size and image scale as well. But so this thing arrived this week, and then what I had to do is unthread the focuser on that came with it, because as I said, I'm not as big a fan of the tack focusers anyway. This one has the 1 1/4. I wanted to go to 2-inch, so we had to unthread that. That was a little bit dicey because they put like a drop of glue or something, some sort of bonding agent in it.
Yeah, thread lock, just to
And
keep it from moving, really.
right. So of course we had to break that. And actually my wife she has really unusually like strong hands. So she actually did it. And I'm like reluctant to put that much force on a brand new telescope that just arrived, but she doesn't know what she's handling there as much as I do. So she just kind of broke it, and then we unthreaded it. And then I had a heck of a job. So I took the 2-inch feather touch off of the 60, and I could not get that threaded onto the 100. And so now I've got the old focuser off, or the focuser off the 100. I know I can thread that back on. But what I ended up doing is I didn't want to like get any kind of metal filings or paint chips if it just wasn't going to fit. And I just didn't want to mess around with it any longer than like 30 seconds. So I actually end up threading on the 100 millimeter focuser, which I knew should be compatible back with the 60, onto the 60 to make sure that that exact one would thread on there. And then I took my finger and I just kind of ran it over that that spot where it had that Loctite or whatever it was. And I don't know whether that was it or what, but as soon as I just like rotated it, just rotated back in, I was able to kind of thread it on there. So anyway, so I have the 2-inch feather touch put right onto that Takahashi 100 right now, which is kind of the setup I wanted. Now, I don't know, there might still be some vignetting, but I know that it has like the full size capability, being a 2-inch focuser, and I'm not losing 10 millimeters or so somewhere there, although the optical path on it seems to be fairly long. So it might not matter one way or the other, but I do like the feather touch focusers anyway. So I still get to have some of that wide field stuff going on. But man, the telescope, Shane, is so light for a 4-inch.
Yeah, and same observation with the 76. And I think in society, at least North American society, I think we associate quality with kind of heavier objects. If it has weight to it, we think it's built better, built stronger. And when I lifted my telescope for the first time, it almost felt like a toy for how light it was. I've had an 80 millimeter William Optics Zenith Star 2, maybe 10 years ago, and basically the same telescope in terms of aperture and focal length as this new Takahashi. But the William Optics probably weighed at least twice, maybe edging towards 3 times as much as this Takahashi.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
incredible.
yeah, it's just wild. Like I know the 60 weighs almost nothing. Like I travel with the 60 frequently. Like, and there's almost like no excuse not to take the 60 because it's so small and light that I can just it just disappears into the luggage. The biggest hassle with it is that clamshell, but oh well.
Hmm.
But the 4 inch, it says, although in the manual it says it's 2.8 kilograms, which translates to 6.1 pounds. It's not that heavy. It actually, there's a miscalculation. And if you actually read the fine print, it says it's 5.6 pounds. And then by switching out to the lightweight feather touch, I think I shave off about another zero point 0.2 pounds or so. So I get it down to 5.3 pounds, which is lighter than any of the 80 millimeter refractors that are out and around there. And it's only, I think, just a smidge heavier with my than my ST80 with the 2 inch and some of the other modifications that I made to that, which does make it a little bit heavier. But it's in that same weight class as my ST80, which is
So,
just unbelievable.
so why would anybody care about having a light telescope versus a heavy telescope, Chris?
Yeah, so easier to mount.
Hmm.
That's like number one, and then super portable. Like the telescope that you use the most is the best telescope, and by having these really lightweight optics, it allows you to go out. Also, as you were mentioning before, quicker cool down.
Yep. Yep.
The ability to have a telescope that's several pounds lighter than another means really fast cool down. In fact, from my understanding, there, even from your telescope, which I think is like in the 4 pound class, my 3 inch, my 60 millimeter, which is a 2.4 inch, it cools down about 15 minutes or so. I think your 76 is reportedly something that cools down in about 20 minutes. So I think it adds like a pretty marginal length of time on to the cool down. But then with the 100 mil, you add about another 10 or 12 minutes onto that even. So, and that's at these weights. But if you had even just a slightly heavier refractor, for example, my 5 inch really is about a 10-pound telescope, say, maybe, it's in that ballpark, which is a really light 5 inch. There's often a lot of nights where I just, in the winter especially, I never get it cool before I get too cold. It's really about an hour-long cool down once you kind of get up into the lower double digits of weight. So it makes a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it does. And, another thing that I like about lighter telescopes is you mentioned it already. You don't need as substantial of a mount or tripod.
Right.
And all of this stuff adds up. A tripod of good quality can easily weigh 10 to 20 pounds. A mount head can weigh the same amount, so another 10 or 20 pounds. And not that it's a lot of weight, but when you're backyard observing in particular, you're often moving the telescope, the whole thing, mount, tripod, telescope, you're moving it around your backyard to see around trees or in between houses, depending on the object you're looking at. So it is nice just to have a lighter weight rig just to pick up and move to the other side of the yard if you have to.
Yeah. And for example, really once, and it's at night too, and it almost feels like you have to double the weight of everything at night. Like it's pretty surprising, like how easy it is to kind of tool around the 60 millimeter f10, which is coming in at like 3.5 pounds or whatever it is. It's just nothing in the day, but like at night when you're trying to get it seated in the mount and blah blah blah, like it's taking you 3 or 4 times longer because you're half asleep and all this stuff. Even that can seem like, oh, like this is starting to feel like a struggle at 4 a.m. like it was the other morning when I was setting up. It's just one of those things. But every pound you add on is like 10 more nights a year you're not going out to do it. Like I just know that from experience. You have to and I really want to do this, as you know, but yeah. So, but I think having the 60 millimeter, that is like the almost no excuse use case. And with that telescope, with the 60, with everything, with the mount, eyepieces, diagonal, without the extender, and with my smallest tripod, the whole deal weighs, I think, 11 or 12 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is just like, I mean, it's not grab and go. You can grab and run a marathon with it. I mean, it really, really is that portable. So that's about, I think, as portable as you can get. I don't think there's anything else out there that's as portable as that setup, with maybe the exception of some of the Borg instruments. But my 100 millimeter that I have here now is just coming in slightly less than the Borg 107 millimeters. So these Takahashis certainly even give the Borgs a run for the money. So, you're really down to a game of ounces and grams if you're trying to run any sort of comparison between the two. But but that's just how they have them set up. But the balance on this is really nice. So I also, unfortunately, like you, don't have tube rings because for whatever reason, it seems really strange, but they've really cut back on tube ring manufacturing in recent years. I don't know. Like, that seems like an odd thing to say, but
It seems so hard to find, though. I don't understand it, especially for the size that I want and that you want. There's not a lot of options out there.
yeah, well, I would have thought 80 millimeter, like you're looking for 80 millimeter rings, I believe. And
Yes.
I would have thought those would be super common, but it turns out like the real common ones are the nannies, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I've got a set of nannies, and I thought when I originally was contacting you and saying, hey, just come get this, you can give your scope a try. I thought, well, I can probably get my 90 millimeter rings working for him because I have the same tube size with my 60, and I have the 90 rings. But it's just not going to be, it's not going to be safe, and you don't want your your brand new telescope making a big unplanned trip to the ground. And that's what it comes down to. It has to be safe and secure. So I did actually order rings with mine. And so I was going to get the Prima Luce Labs, which I know you don't care for as much. So, we'll just sort of leave that one rest. But I do. I like them. I think they're neat. But they were closed down, apparently. So the vendor had tried to get them and just hadn't heard anything. And it's been a number of weeks now. So I was able to find a pair on sale. Not quite exactly what I was going to get. So anyway, you'll see when they arrive. But yeah, not exactly what I was hoping to get originally, but it's fine. They're on sale. So and in the dark, it doesn't really make a difference. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So when's first light for yours, do you think?
Once the rings come.
So
So
a couple weeks probably?
Yeah, probably is
Yeah.
going to be like a couple rings. Of course, like everything is landing here super fast. I've been, and usually we don't even, but we should be running like an unboxing channel on YouTube or something. We like never buy stuff, and now we're getting all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I ordered a Celestron Mars filter because I thought those were out of production. One came up on Amazon, and so I snatched it up, and they said, oh, it'll be here in like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. I thought, well, like, I don't care. I just like prepping for the Mars opposition in October. And of course it was here in 4 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm guessing though that I'm not going to be as lucky with the rings. I certainly haven't been lucky with the rings thus far. So, but I felt kind of bad because I sort of had worked them into a deal with Stefan, and anyway, that's our vendor. And, and I had to write him and say, well, like, I got to test this thing out. I want to try the scope. So, I'm just going to buy another pair of rings somewhere else. So those are coming. Yeah. So that's unfortunate, but whatever. So I was able to get out with the Lumicon diagonal and the multiple filter selector, and I was able to test that in 60
Okay.
before I handed those parts off to you. And it does come to focus just barely with the extender in,
Okay.
which doesn't really matter because, so this is a diagonal, which on the refractor, this is the part that bends the light 90 degrees. You put your eyepieces into it. But this particular diagonal has a big filter slide. And that filter slide allows you to put nebula filters in it. And I'd received it in error because the company sent not the regular diagonal, but had sent this instead. Which is an interesting product. So I've decided to keep it, considering the usual price is much more than what I paid. But typically, I think I would be using it in the f6 mode. And in the f6 mode, like, everything comes to focus no problem. Now, it did focus in f10, and I can use it. It just all the way racked in. There just is like just a hair more in focus left in the telescope. So I'm operating right at the limit, and probably, I probably could use it if I got like what do you call them? Like, I think it's like a low riser adapter. I think you can get a 2-inch to 1 1/4 adapter that allows your eyepieces to sit a little bit lower. and probably if I get something like that, it would even satisfy all that. But with the 60 millimeter in just in the f6 mode, like it was plenty. Like I wouldn't even have noticed the difference hardly. But in the 100 millimeter, I think it's going to be perfect because I've got too much in focus left there now that I took a section out when the focuser comes off. Since it's designed for 1.25, it's going to put the image back a ways. So, since this eats up that space plus another 10 mils, I think that it should be good. But with all these parts, I think that's really not going to be a problem. So I'm not as worried about the fact that that I put that focuser on that telescope. So, but you were asking me something so I now have actually 3 Lumicon diagonals, just the way this all worked out. So,
Wow.
so I have my original. I forget. I think it was called like a Max. It's not a Max Bright, but it's something like that. It's like their branded, whatever the Lumicon brand for their most reflective 98% is. My original one from 2005 or 2006 or whatever it is. I have that one. So now that's about. It's not that old. It's 13 years old. So I must have got it in 08 or something like that. Anyway, 07. So I have that one. I have a brand new 95% reflectivity one, which is the standard. And then I have a brand new 98% reflectivity one. So, because you were, and it's always the debate, could you actually see the difference? And you had asked me a question about going from the old one to the new one. What were you wondering about? And do you care to share your theory on what you were predicting?
Well, so on cloudy nights, I've read from a number of observers that diagonals are in a way disposable equipment that over a period of time, and we're not talking a couple of years, like a decade or more, that the coatings or the mirror deteriorates over that period of time, and the reflectivity may drop from say 95% to somewhere in the 80s. And some observers have reported kind of shock and awe when they replace an old diagonal with a new one. They can't believe how much brighter it is. And I've always been curious whether or not that's something we would notice, or something that you could notice with your old diagonal versus the new one.
So I did run the comparison between my old 98% and the new 95%, because I thought then that one doesn't even have like whatever it is, 3%, right? Which I think should be invisible to the eye anyway, right?
Agreed.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm kind of giving it a bit of a disadvantage on the new one anyway. And for sure, 100%, I could see a difference. It was not like, I'm not going to say it's night and day, but there was a dramatic difference. Like my wife could notice it.
And the new one was brighter, is what
The new
this
one,
was.
yeah, the new
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
was significantly better. Surprisingly so. I was surprised. So the whole reason you kind of led me down this path anyway. And you might not know this, but I think you had bought a pretty good diagonal a couple of years ago. Anyway, we're out at the Grasslands dark site, and we were looking at stuff between your 61 millimeter William Optics and my 60 millimeter Takahashi FS60, which was brand new at the time. So I guess it was 3 years ago. Anyway, and you had a newer diagonal, and I definitely noticed that your scope was brighter than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't imagine that it was the Takahashi optics or anything. And I looked at the diagonal, I thought, I wonder if it is. Like, it kind of has like some dust, and I've dropped stuff in it, and it's been down a million dirt roads. Like, I mean, it probably has traveled close to 1 million miles, I'm guessing, or something. like I'm not even kidding. Like, it's traveled a lot. And I've
Yeah,
taken
with flights too, hey?
flights
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff. So I'm not, that this isn't like a diagonal that somebody has kept on a shelf, well sealed at all times except for observing, and they observe in a in a really good environment that doesn't have any pollen or dust or blah blah blah. Because maybe in those situations, and I've seen people that observe in these really good conditions, and I've lived in a variety of different places where those conditions do exist. So in those conditions, I think, yeah, maybe those diagonals, but that's not the life of my diagonals, as you know. I mean, we're going on these trips, and we're going up and down dusty roads and I've been to the top of mountains with it, and I've been down and observed many times right at sea level with the salt water really heavy in the air. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just like, a variety of really bad conditions over more than 12 years. So yeah, I mean, this definitely, I think, has a negative impact. If you're really going to get out there and you're going to observe, between 100 and 200 times a year, and you're really going to be going to those dark, extreme places, there's going to be some impact I think, on a diagonals mirror, right?
yeah.
I think it's just inevitable. And even that, like, the fact that I've dropped stuff in it, and although, like, it doesn't really look like it's scratched, I can't imagine that it doesn't have some sort of impact on the reflectivity. I've dropped some Barlows in there, or just even like you're at observing, you take an eyepiece out and a member of the public walks up and sticks their fingers in. I mean, just all kinds of stuff, right? And like one or two times on any of this stuff, I don't think makes any difference at all. But just that constant, um, you know, just constant abuse over years and years and years in the field, and really observing, like we're out there and we're really doing this, and we're doing this, more than 100 times a year. So yeah, I mean, maybe if somebody was doing, I know lots of people that just do astronomy 10 or 12 times a year. So yeah, if you were doing that, for sure, your diagonal is probably going to last you your entire life.
Hmm.
But
It brings up a good point too. Like refractor owners, or Cassegrain owners, often focus on getting a real nice telescope, and then often focus on getting a nice collection of eyepieces. But there's three parts to that optical path, and the middle part is that diagonal, and you're only as good as your weakest link. So if you mentioned it kind of with the comparison with your little tack and my little William optics, likely what we'll discover if we do another side by side comparison with your new diagonal is we'll find out that your old diagonal was kind of holding back the
yeah,
performance of that fine telescope, right? So it is important to remember all three parts of that optical path when, wanting to make it appear as good as it can.
yeah, sounds good. So are you? And I think we're kind of ready to wrap up there.
Yeah, yeah.
But are you ready for the offer you're not allowed to refuse?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
So, well, actually, I think you'll enjoy this. I think that this isn't, and I think you won't be able to refuse it. Not for the meaning in that gangster movie those years ago, but I have, as you know, I have an ST80, which is an 80 millimeter f5 achromat, which I've modified with a 2-inch focuser. And you've looked through this telescope.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I
Now,
was quite surprised actually with how good it performs given the price. But anyway, carry on.
and that's, yes, exactly. So it's like $100 telescope. So I've been testing it a little bit in the mornings. And you were saying when you were talking about working on your classic telescopes that you kind of enjoy, kind of messing around with them a little bit, like to get
Yep.
them working, or I guess tinkering, not
Yeah.
messing around. That's what I do. I mess around with instruments because I don't know what I'm doing. You actually tinker because you're looking at it, you're saying it has this problem, and you can work towards this end goal. So this telescope actually has astigmatic and pinched optics, giving some pretty extreme astigmatism. So in one side of focus, you can actually see the images are stretched one way, and then when you rack through focus, you'll see that they stretch at 90 degrees to that. Okay.
Okay.
So what I was thinking is, once you're done, kind of, take your time with this extender, and take your time with the tube ring. Try to get at least a couple or 3 good nights in before we trade back, and then I can provide you with the 80. And then if you can take that, and I think it needs to have the lens cap pulled off, and then I think it needs to have the lens cell pulled out, and the retaining ring around that needs to be taken off, and then it needs to have like a screwdriver wrapped on the side of the cell, and then have the retaining ring threaded back in just so it's snug. And I think that should fix it according to my research online. I've kind of tried to do that. I've had some trouble, right?
Hmm.
Actually getting that off. So knowing that this is a $100 telescope, I'm hoping that maybe you can help resolve these pressing issues.
Yeah, I don't mind taking a stab at it, and yeah, I'll give it a try. See what
Yeah,
we can do.
and then I can actually give you some flocking paper for your troubles as well.
Ooh, all right.
All right. Well, with that, all right, that's the 10th episode, and that's really great because I think in our original research for doing podcasts, again, or whatever, you mentioned that many of them don't hit the double digit numbers. So we're gonna hit at least 11 because we're gonna do another one right now. So with that, we're gonna thank you for listening, and thanks to all the people that have been downloading. Really appreciate it. Have a
Thanks,
good day.
Chris. See
All
ya.
right, we'll see you later. I'm gonna stop this.